Before the storm, would you rather be the boat or the ocean? Sometimes it only takes a moment, and everything collapses. Not because you failed, not because you were weak, but because the world doesn't need a reason to drown you. In 300 BC, in the coastal city of Cyprus, there lived a man named Zeno. He was a successful merchant, wealthy, respected. By all worldly measures, his life was a great ship, full of sails, steady in the wind, destined for more. And then, in a single quiet night, that ship sank. Not metaphorically, literally. While traveling from Phoenicia to Piraeus, Zeno's vessel was swallowed by the sea. Along with it, everything he owned disappeared beneath the waves. When he finally reached shore, he was no longer a merchant, no longer wealthy, no longer anyone, in the way the world would recognize. Only two things remained: his breath and the silence. What do you do when the sea takes everything and leaves you with nothing? If you were Zeno, would you collapse? Would you scream at the sky? Would you curse the randomness of fate? Most people do, but Zeno did not. Instead, he walked to Athens, to a small bookshop, and there, still salt-stained and lost, he opened a book by Socrates. No one knows what he was hoping to find, but what he did find was something the storm could not take. From the wreckage of a worldly life, Zeno would go on to build a philosophy that has survived over 2,000 years of storms. And it all began with a shipwreck. What if the ocean had taken your ship? Not a metaphor, your real life, your career, your reputation, gone in a night you didn't see coming. What if you woke up tomorrow and the titles no longer fit? What if the house burned, the job ended, the person you loved stopped choosing you? What if, like Zeno, you were left standing in the ruins of everything that once made sense? Would you survive the storm, or would you become it? We like to think we're strong. We tell ourselves we'd rebuild. But grief is quiet, and loss has a way of hollowing you out from the inside, long before anyone else notices. And in that hollow space, the question begins to whisper, who are you? When nothing around you says who you are. This is where Stoicism begins, not as a theory, but as a survival instinct. Zeno could have drowned in regret. He could have clawed at the past, tried to bargain with fate, replayed what he should have done differently. But he didn't. He accepted. And in doing so, he became dangerous, not to others, but to despair itself. Because when a person loses everything and still stands up quietly, life no longer owns them. That's the hidden power of Stoicism, not the absence of emotion, but the refusal to be ruled by it. To feel everything, but collapse to nothing. Some say rock bottom is a place, but sometimes it's a page. When Zeno walked into that modest Athenian bookshop, he was still drenched in salt and silence, not just from the sea, but from everything that had been taken from him. He wasn't looking for a new life. He didn't even know what he was looking for. But he opened a book, and in that book he met Socrates, not as a figure from history, but as a companion in ruin. Socrates, too, had known what it meant to lose things: reputation, freedom, even life itself. But what Zeno discovered wasn't just a man or even a teaching. It was a direction, a way to walk when the path disappears. That's when the broken merchant found something no ship could carry: a compass. Because when the waves take your map, you don't look for a new one. You learn to sail by the stars. This was the birth of Stoicism, not as a philosophy made in ivory towers, but as a way of surviving the wreckage. Zeno began to gather with others in the public spaces of Athens, the Stoa Poikile, a painted porch open to slaves and senators alike. He didn't preach salvation. He practiced perspective. And what grew from those conversations wasn't a religion or a dogma. It was an anchor, a set of principles that could hold you still, even when the world moves like a storm around you. It said, you don't control what happens to you, but you do control how you carry it. That doesn't mean you're indifferent. It means you're intentional. It means you bleed slower, breathe deeper, and choose not to make your pain someone else's inheritance. Zeno had lost everything the world could give, and so he discovered everything it couldn't take: clarity, equanimity, and the silent courage to live on his own terms. That's not just a philosophy, that's rebirth. Stoicism is often misunderstood. People hear the word Stoic and imagine someone numb, unfeeling, disconnected. They picture a stone statue, not a living soul. But Zeno wasn't building statues. He was tending fire. A Stoic doesn't feel less. They feel deeper. But they've learned to master what most of us let master us. Imagine a candle in the wind. It flickers wildly at the mercy of every gust. Now picture a lantern, the same flame but protected by glass. The Stoic is not cold. They are the lantern. In a world that rewards overreaction, where rage is mistaken for power and panic for passion, to remain calm is an act of rebellion. To respond instead of react is a rare kind of strength. The Stoics didn't reject emotion. They refined it. They saw anger not as something to indulge, but to examine. They viewed grief not as weakness, but as proof of love. They didn't run from pain. They sat with it until it taught them something, because pain, when left unexamined, becomes bitterness. But pain, when held with clarity, becomes wisdom. And this is what made Stoicism different. It wasn't a way to avoid life. It was a way to face it without flinching. The Stoic doesn't say, "I don't care." They say, "I will not be broken by what I cannot control." And that shift, from resistance to acceptance, is what transforms pain into practice. The modern world sees feeling everything as freedom. But the Stoics saw it differently. Freedom is not being ruled by what you feel. Not suppressing it, not dramatizing it, but containing it with dignity. Zeno's flame didn't die in the storm. It was forged through it. And from that flame, others would light their own. A former slave, a Roman senator, an emperor, all carrying the same fire, not to burn the world, but to light a path through it. You can burn down a man's house. You can chain his hands. You can strip his title, his land, his name. But there is one thing you cannot take: his flame. Zeno lit a small fire on a painted porch in Athens, and that fire would reach the darkest prisons, the highest courts, and even the marble halls of Rome. Because Stoicism was never meant for one class of people, it was never locked behind ivory gates or written in the language of the elite. It was made for life, in all its brutal, beautiful, chaotic truth. Epictetus was born into slavery. He owned nothing, not even his body. And yet, he wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." His flame burned not in freedom, but in the refusal to let chains define his worth. Seneca was a statesman, surrounded by politics, wealth, and the constant whispers of power. He knew how fragile fortune was, and still he warned, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." His strength wasn't in influence, it was in perspective. To live richly, but not be owned by riches. To hold power, but not be held by it. And then there was Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, ruler of the known world. He could have commanded armies with a flick of his hand. Instead, he wrote in the solitude of his tent, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." His empire wasn't built in marble. It was carved in the quiet hours of reflection, between war, plague, and betrayal. 3 men, 3 stations, 1 fire. The Stoic flame is not passed by birthright. It's earned in the way you suffer. Not loudly, but with clarity. Not perfectly, but with intention. Zeno's ship sank, but his light did not. And centuries later, that same light would shine in chains, in Senate chambers, in battlefields. Because true resilience is not determined by your station in life, but by the stillness you carry inside it. No one likes suffering, but what if you could suffer on your own terms? The Stoics practiced something radical, something almost unthinkable today. They chose discomfort, voluntarily. Why? Because they knew that life wouldn't ask for permission to be cruel, and so they decided to meet pain before pain came to meet them. Seneca would sleep on the floor. Epictetus walked barefoot in the cold. Musonius Rufus, one of the most overlooked yet profound Stoics, would eat only bland, simple meals, not because he had to, but because he wanted to know, if all of this were taken from me, could I still stand? This was not masochism. It was preparation. It was mental training for a world that does not care what you expect. We live in a culture that tells us to avoid pain at all costs. Comfort is marketed as success. Luxury is mistaken for meaning. Convenience becomes our god, and anything that challenges it we label unfair. But the Stoics saw it differently. The more you need, the more fragile you become. The more fragile you become, the easier life breaks you. So they practiced breaking, not to destroy themselves, but to unbuild the illusion that happiness lives in things. Try this. Sleep without a pillow, skip a meal, take a cold shower. Wear your oldest clothes out in public. Notice what rises up in you: shame, insecurity, anger. That's your training ground, not to suppress it, but to confront it, gently, repeatedly, until it loses its grip. Because if you can find peace while shivering, if you can smile while hungry, if you can remember who you are when stripped of all decoration, then no one can ever truly take anything from you again. That is wealth. That is power. And that is why the Stoics practiced discomfort, not to escape life, but to walk through it, unshaken, unowned, and undefeatable. There is a line, invisible but absolute. On one side, the world. On the other, you. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control. The idea that life is divided into two realms: what you can control and what you absolutely, unequivocally cannot. Most suffering begins when we try to trade places with the gods, trying to control outcomes, people, timing, fate. But what if you stopped? What if you stopped trying to hold the rain and instead learned how to carry an umbrella? The chief task in life, Epictetus said, is to distinguish between what is in our control and what is not. Not a suggestion, a chief task, a way to stay sane in a world that spins whether you agree or not. Let's bring this closer. Think of a farmer. He tills the soil, plants the seeds, waters each day, tends to weeds. He watches the skies, hopes for rain, but knows he cannot command it. Then one season, the storm comes too early, or not at all. The crops suffer. Did he fail? If he measures success by the harvest, maybe. But if he measures by effort, intention, and integrity, he has already won. Because the farmer controls the labor, not the clouds. Or imagine a mother who teaches her child to be kind, brave, honest. She cannot decide who her child becomes, only how she shows up in the becoming. And that has to be enough, because anything else would break her. This is where freedom lives, not in apathy, but in accurate placement of your energy. Don't water the wind, water the roots. The Stoic doesn't say, let go, because it sounds good. They say it because holding on to what you can't command will rot you from the inside. So, when the next storm comes, when the ship rocks, when the deal falls through, the lover leaves, the world shifts. Ask yourself this: is this mine to carry? And if it's not, let it drift away. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Wealth is not a number, it is a direction. The Stoics didn't count coins, they counted qualities. Not what you owned, but how you lived. Because when the storm takes your possessions, what remains? Only what you planted within. Zeno taught that true wealth begins with 4 things: not properties, not status, but virtues. Like a compass, they point inward and onward, no matter how lost the sea becomes. Let's name them. Let's walk with them. 1. Wisdom. Not intelligence, not cleverness, but the ability to see clearly, to know what is yours to change and what must be released, to discern signal from noise, to understand that right action matters more than right results. Between stimulus and response, Viktor Frankl wrote, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. Wisdom lives in that space. 2. Courage. Not the absence of fear, but moving anyway. The farmer plants, not knowing if rain will come. The mother loves, not knowing if her child will stay kind. You rise, knowing failure might greet you, and still you rise. 2 words, said Epictetus: persist, resist. Persist in what is good. Resist what is petty, even when no one sees it, especially then. 3. Temperance, moderation. In a world that screams for more, the Stoic whispers, enough. Not from scarcity, from sufficiency. To eat when hungry, not bored. To speak when needed, not to fill the silence. To feel joy without addiction, and sorrow without collapse. Temperance is the balance that keeps the flame from becoming wildfire. 4. Justice. Not in the legal sense, in the human sense, that we were born not for domination, but for each other. No one should do harm to another, Marcus Aurelius wrote, because we were born for cooperation, like feet, hands, and eyes. Justice means we rise together, or not at all. These four, wisdom, courage, temperance, justice, they are the sail, the anchor, the rudder, the compass. You may lose your job, your name, even your health. But if you live with these, you are never truly poor. Because the storm can sink your ship, but it cannot sink your direction. What do you do when the storm lasts 27 years, when the walls don't shake, because they are made to keep you in? When the sea is not water, but time, dripping slowly in the corner of a prison cell? That was Nelson Mandela's shipwreck. He had every reason to drown in hatred. He had every justification to rise with vengeance. The world had taken his freedom, his youth, his dignity, but it could not take his flame. Because while others rotted in bitterness, Mandela read, and one of the books he read was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor writing quietly in the noise of empire, a South African prisoner reading silently in the noise of injustice. Two men, centuries apart. One truth. You may imprison my body, but my response is still mine to give. When Mandela was released, the world waited for wrath, but he walked out with wisdom, with temperance, with justice, not as punishment, but as compassion. He said, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies." So he chose forgiveness, not because they deserved it, but because he did. He chose to build, not break, to lead, not lash out, to walk forward even with shackles still clanging in memory. That is Stoicism, not in theory, but in blood. What storm have you endured? What prison have you lived in of regret, betrayal, bitterness? And more importantly, what would it cost you to finally walk free? Forgiveness is not the absence of justice. It is the triumph of clarity over chaos. The moment you realize you may not get back what was taken, but you do get to choose what happens next, and that choice is yours alone. And now we return to the sea, to Zeno, to the shipwreck, to the silence that follows the storm. Because storms don't stop. They return. Another loss, another failure, another moment when everything feels like it's slipping through your hands. And when it does, what will you do? Will you clench your fists at the sky? Will you wait for the world to make it right? Or will you remember that you don't need the storm to pass in order to be at peace? Because peace isn't waiting on the horizon. It's already here, in how you see, how you act, how you choose. You are not the waves. You are not the storm. You are not the boat being tossed from side to side. You are the sailor who keeps his hand steady on the rope. You are the anchor that holds when everything else is shifting. You are the ocean, vast, deep, unmoved. Zeno's ship sank, but from its wreckage he built a philosophy, not to erase suffering, but to give it shape, not to numb the pain, but to place it in your hands so you can choose what it becomes. That's Stoicism. It doesn't promise safety, It doesn't promise success. It promises something better. Stillness in motion, clarity in chaos, freedom in the middle of what you cannot control. So now, let me ask again. When the storm comes, do you want to be the boat or the ocean?